Good evening, everybody. Sorry for the delay to get started here. We're having a few technology issues. We are here tonight to talk about the Piney Branch Elementary School feasibility study and transportation. We're doing a hybrid, which we have several people on the call right now, and I see a lot of people in here have been at the meeting. I see a few new faces that are in here tonight. So what's different about tonight's meeting is that we're initially going to talk about some of the transportation study that we looked at. It's just a preliminary study that we started with, and we're sharing that information with you just so that everyone's aware of where we're at. And we'll talk a little bit more into where that's going and with the superintendent and decisions made forward with the project. But then we also have Stantec here doing their presentation for the feasibility study, which a lot of you have seen and some of you have not. So if you can just be patient with us. We do have two translators, and in the chat we have Amharic and a Spanish translator. And they are, if you need them, please add that in the chat, or if you're here and you need that, Spanish is in the back here and Amharic is over here on the left. Hi, everyone. Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Jasmine McDuffie is here from Stantec. We're going to let her start. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. Can everybody hear me? Again, welcome to everybody who's in the room, and also welcome to those who've joined our meeting virtually. My name is Jasmine McDuffie. I am a principal at Stantec Architecture. As Robbie mentioned, he's the point of contact for the project, so if you have any questions related to the project or the process, please reach out to him directly. And not with us today, but we have a civil engineer on our team as well as a talented group of individuals, or engineers rather. Sean Lindeman is very familiar with Tacoma Park. They've done a lot of work in the city. And just to go over our agenda, we're going to just talk a little bit briefly about why we're here, show you the schedule and where we are in that. Again, we're going to talk about transportation and the holding center, and then go into a little bit of the design. We made some observations. We received some feedback throughout the course of our meetings, and then share with you our design options that we've been preparing and refining over the process, and then open it up for discussion. So again, why we're here, we are here to complete a feasibility study and determine really the most effective, efficient way to go about modernizing Piney Branch Elementary School. To make it more safe and secure, to improve instruction and delivery for the students, to improve occupant health and well-being, to increase and improve the site and accessibility on the site, and to improve operational efficiency. And all of this is to create a study to help inform the superintendent's fall 2025 CIP. Again, tonight, we're going to be discussing the holding centers. We're going to start with that and busing. As well as then go into sharing with you the design options that have been prepared and refined over the process. Again, if you are joining us virtually, please add your comments in the chat. We are monitoring the chat throughout the call. And if you are in person, we have 2 mic stands set up for you to ask questions. So in terms of the schedule, we've had 4 community meetings and 1 staff meeting. So today's meeting is an additional meeting that was added to the calendar in response to the feedback we received from the community, specifically to also address some of the questions pertaining to holding centers and busing. And in July, there's going to be a meeting with the City of Tacoma Park and a presentation. The feasibility study will be sent to the superintendent in July for review, and in October, we anticipate the superintendent making a recommendation to the Board of Education. So we're going to start with transportation and holding centers, and Julie Morris is going to come up and present.
Good evening. So we heard lots of comments and questions regarding the school moving off-site during the construction. Questions about where would they go, how far would it be, what those options would look like. So internally, our facilities team met with the transportation team for MCPS, and the information that's on the slide that I'm going to go over is preliminary. It's their best information they can provide at this time. This would all be revisited as it gets closer, like during the design period leading up to construction. So just to start with, the current situation, there are students who are walkers, car riders, and bus riders. What we learned was that the bus riders are sharing buses with Tacoma Park Elementary School students, which is a little bit unique because the schools are paired. So because of that, there are currently 9 buses serving the school, and the travel time to the current site can be up to 20 minutes for certain students. I think the students that have the longest bus rides are the ones that live by the city line. Of MCPS's holding centers, the Grosvenor Center in Bethesda was what our transportation team told us was slightly closer than the next closest holding center, which would be the Fairland Center. So they prepared this information with regard to the scenario if Piney Branch is going to the Grosvenor Holding Center on Grosvenor Lane in Bethesda. As is typically the case when a school goes to the holding center, the bell schedule changes, and what they were thinking would be roughly a 3rd tier bell schedule, roughly 9:45 in the morning to 4:10 p.m., although that could shift slightly. In order to make it work, it would be students on different buses. The Tacoma Park Elementary students would stay on their buses, and the Piney Branch students would be served by all different buses. And approximately 12 dedicated buses would be required for all of the Piney Branch students to get them to and from the holding center. So new routes would be created. We didn't go so far as to identify what exactly those routes would be, where the stops would be, that sort of thing, but they would be different than, there could be some that are the same, but they could be different because, of course, the current walkers would now be bus riders temporarily. So the distance is about 10.5 miles from the current site to the Grosvenor Center, and the average travel time by bus at these hours, like these are really rush hour times, so that makes the average travel time about 45 minutes. Some students might have a little bit less time on the bus, but some students could have a little bit more time. But on average, the average bus rider would have 45 minutes. Any questions at this point? You want to come up? 45 minutes from pickup at their bus stop, which could be very close to Piney Branch, but may not be. Correct. So the bus would make however many stops, and that would be their average time that they've calculated.
I assume that's a picture of Grosvenor.
Yes.
My question is, if there's an accident on the Beltway, I assume they'll be taking the Beltway. What happens?
Okay.
We are live streaming this.
Yeah, so she just confirmed that. We just confirmed that the picture is Grosvenor. My question is, if there's an accident on the Beltway, of course not involving the bus, what happens to the schedule at the school if they're like a half hour, 45 minutes late, especially if they have a test first period?
So transportation has communication, and it's possible they could reroute the bus to avoid that and potentially take east-west highway or different streets. there also would be relay to the school to let them know bus such and such, or all these buses are going to be late, so the school can be accommodating and not mark the students as tardy, that sort of thing. So hopefully that would be a few and far between scenario.
So with other schools that have gone to the holding school, how has before and after school been handled?
So the before and after care providers may go to the holding school, or they may find another location in the community here. So there is precedent for them going, but there's also precedent for them staying. It just really depends. I think they typically might do a survey or poll to parents to find out what parents are looking for in terms of care, because dropping off at the holding center and picking up from the holding center is not going to be convenient for parents. So maybe working with, I mean, there's a lot of municipal buildings in the area that potentially could serve to help with that purpose.
Hi, I have the mic, so I guess I should go next. Can you hear me okay? So you mentioned that it's 10.5 miles and it's the closest holding school. Other people have mentioned Fairland as a potential alternative, which I gather that as the miles go might be a little further, but when the transportation people recommended this one, did they look only at miles, or did they also look at travel times, given what we know about the direction of rush hour traffic? Because I had heard some people say when calculating travel time that Fairland, you'd be going against rush hour traffic. And so there, I was wondering whether that was considered as an alternative and rejected.
Yes. So it was considered, I wouldn't say fully rejected, because the way that holding center assignments work is it depends on what other elementary schools might be on the same schedule as Piney Branch and might also need holding centers. So it would be figured out at that time. And maybe it's only a 5-minute, 10-minute difference. I'm not sure, but it really would depend if there's another school that might be closer to Grosvenor that makes more sense for them to go there, or vice versa with Fairland.
Eduardo Lerma got a Tacoma Park and a incoming kindergartner. Want to make sure that these slides are able to be seen online. Some parents are saying they're not able to. Oh, now they can. Okay. One of the things that was brought up last Friday or Thursday, about 200 parents sent a letter over to you all. Just want to make sure you guys received that. Robbie, I think it was you're one of those signers, or the ones we sent it to. Maybe this is covered, so I don't want to get too bogged in because I'm sure this is the first slide. Are there alternative sites closer that you guys are thinking of refurbishing? I know that's come up in the last 3 meetings, and if so, what are they? Grosvenor, 45 minutes on a good day, without bus delays, without all this other stuff, is I think optimistic at best.
So staff has not looked at alternates at this time. However, we are going into our CIP process. So that is an opportunity for all of this feedback to loop back to our superintendent and board of education about if there's energy for us to explore other sites and potentially pursue a site selection. But none of that was in scope for us to be looking at as part of this study.
It seems pretty obvious that Tacoma Park is an outlier, and I'm shouting only because online. Sorry. It seems like Tacoma Park is an outlier for the rest of the county in terms of the closest holding schools. Especially Piney Branch, Rolling Crest, Tacoma Park. When I spoke to previous administrators at Tacoma Park Elementary who did Grosvenor for the last rebuild, they said it was it was very painful on families. Would love for that scope to be expanded, as that has been a constant theme for almost every parent at every one of these meetings. So please relay that to the superintendent. And we're happy to set up a meeting as concerned parents to the superintendent.
Thank you for that. And just to make sure that you all know that this is not by any means the only community that has that concern. There are communities in other parts of the county that also believe that there is not a close enough holding center for them as well. So it's something that staff is well aware of. That is a concern, that we have limited holding centers. We don't any longer even have a secondary holding center. For a middle school, for example.
Okay, so I'll second that request, put my name on that letter. But in a question about the transportation. So we're walkers, so I don't know, this might be common knowledge, but if they're going on the Beltway, are there seatbelts on the bus? How does that normally work? Are there certain buses that are Beltway buses, or?
I know that some of the fleet and more of it have seatbelts, but that would have to be a question back to transportation. We could follow up and find that out for you.
Hi. Yes. Were trailers considered as an option as opposed to holding centers?
So because the Piney Branch site is so small, it is the smallest elementary school site. There's no ability for relocatable classrooms, especially the number of which you would need to house the entire population, much less there would not be core space available like a cafeteria or gymnasium.
So it sounds like this is a situation that other students have faced before. Is there data on the attendance rate impacts and academic impacts for students that have gone through this experience in the past, and can you make that available?
So the most recent example right now is that Northwood High School is currently at Woodward High School as a holding center for them, and their attendance rate is higher now than it was before the move.
Is it also a 45-minute drive? Or is it a
I
closer?
don't know offhand how long their drive
Okay.
is.
I think because it is like elementary school students, and it's so far, I'd be interested in like a comparable situation. I think if we could see some data on how communities have fared in a similar situation, it might help ease some minds.
Sure, and we did mention trying to get some of that from transportation when we met with them. So that'll be a follow-up. What were they able to come up with from previous elementary schools? They cited some examples of middle schools, and they did cite a few examples of elementaries. We just don't have that more formally yet.
Thank you for being here. Do you have any other slides on transportation that we're holding you off from
There's just
getting to?
one more slide that shows the floor plan for the school without its relocatable classrooms. Or the site plan.
Okay.
There are plenty of relocatable classrooms there as well, because as a holding center, it holds larger schools as well.
Sure. Okay. I just want to make sure we weren't keeping you from showing us more data about transportation. So my question, which maybe was covered by your previous responses. So you're saying the average in the transportation people's view is 45 minutes for these students. We've previously in the meetings talked about this being a 2+ year project. Have you ever had an elementary school do 45-minute each way everyday busing for over 2 years?
I wouldn't say we've done over 2 years. We used to do these projects in 18 months.
And I know Tacoma Park Elementary School was only 9 months. And I think for many parents, thinking about doing this for 2 years is very different. 2 years plus is very different.
Right, I would say.
We've heard from Robbie 2 years plus.
I guess it could be potentially. Well, we're not quite there yet,
Sure.
but typically that's our schedule.
Okay. And so I think to the point that Eduardo was making, we are an outlier. You've never done this to a student body before of elementary schoolers, bus them this far every day for 2+ years. This would be the first time doing that. That's crazy. Don't do this.
Has Montgomery County ever rented or leased an available school building as a holding center when there was no available holding center? It so happens there are 2 vacant school buildings quite close by that don't currently belong to the county. And I know in the past, people have said that county's not in the process of acquiring any real estate permanently, but I'm curious whether that has ever been done to your knowledge.
So there are leased spaces, but not exactly for holding centers, because we have and own properties that are either holding centers or closed schools used by other uses like tenants. But we have leased space for certain situations and certain programs, and it's not completely outside the realm of possibility. But here, standing here tonight, I can't tell you one way or another if that's direction the school system will be taking, but they're definitely going to be hearing, if they haven't already heard from the community, that that's a desire.
So my question is about the impact on staff. I'm curious, in the past, when a school has been moved a further distance, what the attrition rate is for staff members. Like, are there teachers that are lost? Because that's really what a school is. It's not a building, it's the staff. And I am an educator, not for MCPS, but I see firsthand how challenging teacher turnover and retention is on a student body. And I think that's what scares me the most, because I'll be honest, if I were in this position and I found out that an hour-and-a-half commute was going to be added to my day, and I have children at home, as much as I love my school community, that would be really, really challenging to take that on as a burden in my daily commute, in my daily life. And so I'm curious what the impact has been on staffing when a school, an entire population of staff has been asked to move.
Sure, it's certainly a valid concern. It could be that the location could be closer for some, could be farther for others. That is just going to depend. And also to say, from prior experience, there was not really a noticeable attrition in staff beyond the norm when my son's school moved to a holding center. I think all the teachers went. Maybe one or two retired or left, but that was normal. And then they came back. So it's really just, it's a personal thing.
I understand that, but just like, how far was in your experience? Because I think adding an hour-and-a-half commute is really different than like a 40-minute
Silver Spring to Rockville, so 30-ish minutes.
30-ish minutes.
I just wanted to follow up on the question that was asked before that, but I agree with that. And
we can't hear.
Oh, sorry. I was wondering if you could give a little bit of information about how we could you were saying that there hasn't been, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this correctly. What was your question before? Yes, I'm sorry. How can we make a concerned party of interest and like showcase how interested we are in the opportunity to lease spaces? I know you said it's not out of the realm of possibility. So is there a way that we could gather a group of people to say, hey, how would we make it very clear that this is really important to us?
Okay. So a few things to say on that. One is that we have been receiving and will continue to receive communications, emails and the like that come in. We also have upcoming meetings with the cluster coordinators that your Blair cluster coordinators will be meeting with us and talking about cluster-wide concerns and issues. Then there's more opportunities after the superintendent comes out with a recommendation in the fall and before the Board of Education takes action. There are public hearings and opportunities for oral and written testimony at that time in November. So along the way, there's those opportunities.
Yes. I'm a parent of two children that are no longer in elementary school, but did attend both Tacoma Elementary and Piney Branch. And I just want to express a little bit of surprise, and I'm probably new to this particular process, but just want to express how hopeful I am that Piney Branch will be selected for renovation. As a parent whose children went through that school, just to underscore, like, there are classrooms without windows. There are classrooms where space is super tight. There's HVAC problems. And it's a lovely school and community, but it's a real challenge for kids. I do know even some families who elected to take their kids out of the public schools during that period of time because they're just having challenges learning well in that space. So it's just, I know it's really a tough balance in terms of, the particular cohort of kids who will be part of, who would be affected by the construction. And it also is an investment in the community as a whole. I don't have kids who are in elementary anymore, but I came just because it's an important investment. We've been hoping for this for some time, so I really appreciate that it's on the docket. I'll also just say my son, again, this is different than elementary, I get it, but as a high schooler who's commuting from Tacoma to Rockville, and I can tell you how that, if anybody wants to talk with me about how that process is working with the county, I'm happy to do that.
I just wanted to jump off of the last person's comments as well as the person who was concerned about staffing. So trade-offs that's something to always keep in mind. You got to keep your eye on the prize. What is it you want at the end of this project? And if we spend money on on refurbishing a school that doesn't belong to MCPS, to bring it up to MCPS standards to be able to use as a holding school, how much further will that push this project down the road? But then I wanted to talk about staffing. And so as a retired teacher from MCPS, 32 years, I have the scars to prove it, who lived through 2 of these projects where children were bused, as well as one where we did a renovation where there were relocatable classrooms put just outside to house those whose classrooms were being rebuilt. What ended up happening as far as staffing is that people were fighting to get on our staff because they knew that there was going to be a shiny, pretty, awesome school at the end with all the bells and whistles, and that's where they wanted to be. Plus, it also helped that the communities where I worked were awesome, but that's just something else to keep in mind. And then I know that MCPS has had several holding schools. And so just because it's a holding school one year doesn't necessarily mean it'll be a holding school the next year. Because I know Radnor is another case. Radnor has been a holding school and it hasn't been occupied for several years. And so it's got a broken window situation and deterioration inside. So when there's not a population to move into a school, that school will sit. So Grosvenor is actually in really good shape and Fairland is in really good shape.
Julie, can I just chime in for a second? A number of comments have come up in the chat. Hi, everyone. Andrea Soyatoka with Facilities. Just wanted to make sure everyone's clear on the CIP process. So as part of all the feasibility studies are happening, both Piney Branch and a number of them across the county, right? That helps us understand our planning processes for the FY27 to 32 CIP, which the superintendent will make his recommendation to the Board of Education in October.
What's a CIP?
Very good question. Capital Improvement Plan. It is a 6-year plan and it's all around the renovations, additions, modernizations. We also do all the roof and HVAC. It is a $2 billion program for MCPS. Every 2 years, we have the opportunity to really vamp up, consider new. This past year for FY26, we are called what is an amendment year. So it's very minor modification. So very little was changed. This is 27. It's the odd year for us. It gives us the opportunity to revamp. And so while today we are not presenting any alternative holding sites, I just wanted to assure everyone that we are holistically looking at all board-owned, operated. You're welcome to look at those sites. They are in the current CIP. You will see those listed on there. This woman has mentioned several of them several do. Lilac is in Fairland, like Julie has referenced. I would say that is a very similar commute and distance, and they will be there for 2 years. So that is actually a very comparable example. But there are other sites, certainly in the Down County area too, that we want to look at holistically, not that others that are serving actively as a holding center, but we need to come up with a better vision for that 10 to 15 year plan for our overall capital improvement, if it's worth the investment as we think about other renovations and modernizations that will happen across this county. It is something that we might want the superintendent and board to consider. So I just wanted to make that clear. That's not something we can throw out at this time because that is still under evaluation, but you will have the opportunity to weigh in on that in October and November during those public comment periods that Julie mentioned.
Oh, okay. Hello. I'm just going to start by saying something that I know not everyone's going to like, and that's fine because nobody really likes what I generally tend to say. I hear the point about, we have to make sacrifices for the greater good. I am the first person to understand that. We cannot be short-sighted, and we absolutely need a new school. I don't think there's a question about it. Just so it's very clear where I'm coming from, and it is indeed a very selfish place, between COVID, stuff in my personal life, which I know is really not relevant, I'm tired of making sacrifices. I'm sorry, but I am. And that includes sending my kid 45 minutes each way. That's number one. So just very clear where I stand. Number two, we've been through several meetings now, two of which I've been to, at least three, I lost count. And it was very clear to you and to Robbie that a holding school of Grosvenor was not really that great of an idea. And it's frustrating that we said, let's find someplace closer. Let's find someplace closer. It's been weeks now. And the slides you pull up, we're going to think about Grosvenor. Why are you coming to us empty-handed without even the slightest iota of something that could possibly be different? I appreciate what you're saying, that you're going to consider it, but frankly, between your office's lack of response, Robbie, who hasn't responded to emails, which I FOIA'd anyway, so we'll see what you're actually doing all day. I just want to know why you haven't come here with at least some sort of idea that's not this. And it's frustrating because it makes it seem like our voices aren't being heard. And I just candidly would like to know that.
So as staff, with a scope given to us and holding center choices that we have available to us at this present time, this is the information that we can provide. As Andrea stated, hopefully there will become more potential options. We need to look at holistically what other schools nearby here might also be candidates for projects soon, so that MCPS can make the best decision for the longer term, not to potentially open a holding center that only serves one school, but that the intent is to serve multiple schools over time. So please allow us to go through our CIP process with our new data that we are receiving for key facility indicators on the conditions of other facilities, and go through our process to be able to respond in a different way.
Hi, Crescent Martin, parent of a student who will be impacted, rising kindergartner. First, a request for data in the future, previous elementary schools that have moved to holding centers and what the average busing time was, so that we can put this in context of what other communities have been asked to go through. We are at the very edge of the county, and that makes it very difficult, but it would be helpful to know the context. You also mentioned space for portable classrooms. Will students be in portable classrooms if Grosvenor were selected? Are they being bused an hour and a half a day and still going to portable classrooms?
So we haven't run the capacity calculation yet to know for sure, but based on the size of the school, I believe that most students would be inside the main building. All students would be coming into the main building for lunch and PE and specials in the media center and those sorts of things. But the average school that is in a holding center does need some classes out in relocatables because the holding centers are small. They each have, I would say it has, I'm thinking 19 rooms, give or take, just to put it in context.
Hi. Okay, a few things. First, and I'm speaking for myself, but this is also based on conversations with other parents and the letter we sent. The parents who are concerned about the busing are not against renovation. We fully recognize it needs to be done, and we appreciate what you're doing. And the sacrifices aside, and I understand that, and I am a parent that may be sacrificing as well. What we're really asking for is if we have to sacrifice, we as parents want to make sure we're doing everything we can to make sure there are actually no other alternatives. And I just like don't want that to be getting lost because it seems like it's us versus them, right? And we don't want a renovation and we don't want to bust our kids. That's not it. We just want to make sure that we are crossing all the crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's, turning over all the, looking outside the box if that's possible. And in order to do that, and I'm sorry, I like kind of followed what you said about the CIP. I think I need to read it. I'm more of like a reader, but who is actually the one who's going to be making this decision? Who do we need to be advocating for? And what sort of things do you think would be helpful with that advocacy? Should we band together with East Silver Spring, with Rolling Terrace, with any of the other schools in this area? Would that be more meaningful? What do you suggest we should be doing to get our voice across? Because I think a lot of folks are frustrated because they feel like their voices aren't being heard.
I'll start and Julie can chime in. Similar questions coming up in the chat, so just trying to track those as well. Very much have acknowledged and received the letter. We will respond. The superintendent has received the letter, so I just wanted to assure everyone of that. He has shared it. I know I personally wasn't copied, but he has shared it with us, so did just want to acknowledge that. I will say this process again, and identifying a holding center is a step ahead. We're sort of a step ahead of where we need to be. Part of the process is to identify planning and design and construction funds in that capital, that CIP process, at which time we also identify that holding center. So you still have great advocacy available. That is part of the fall part that happens in that October. Once the superintendent, and it's usually mid-October, makes his initial recommendation to the Board of Education, that then there'll be a series of opportunities where you can go. You can come individually, you can come together as a school district. I leave that up to you, but there will be opportunity at that time to come in and weigh in on the plan. What's been selected and proposed to even be put in that 6-year plan. And in there, it'll also identify if a school anywhere across the county, not just Piney Branch, is noted in that CIP, the holding school would also be identified. Does that make sense? Julie, I'll let you chime in, but during the October presentation to the superintendent, there should be dates as well listed for when you can come and give that public testimony.
So the Board of Education website will list the dates for public hearings and how to sign up to testify. In addition, our website posts the CIP when it is released, and we blast out messages to, we mostly do rely on PTA cluster coordinators. I know Therese Gibson has been active in this area and she's been attending these meetings. Folks like her help get that out to the broader community. That is something that we also have a list of email addresses from folks who have come to these meetings. That would be a source for us to share it out to let you know and where to look in the big book. Go to chapter 4, go to the cluster, see what the recommendation is. And with regard to advocacy with other schools, just in context in the past, like for instance, if there's another school right ahead of yours, there's typically advocacy to get that project completed on time so that the next project can move forward. So we hear a lot from schools supporting other schools in that vein.
Good evening. This is Joyce and Terry Siemens. We're a couple old people who just come here to listen to what's going on in the community. And it seems just hearing the discussion tonight that I don't hear anybody saying that they don't see the great value of renovating the school and the benefit to the generations of kids that'll follow. But I do hear a lot of angst about the children who are going to be are being considered to be bused for quite a distance, and it's parents are rightly concerned about their children and their children's education and the well-being of their families during this renovation, and that's where it seems like there hasn't been enough consideration of what alternatives there might be. there's a lot of vacant buildings in this area that could be considered. They may not be owned by the Board of Education or the county at this point, but they may be buildings that could be used. There are parks in this area. There's a park up on Philadelphia Avenue that might be adequate for the trailers, whatever we call them, for classrooms, the portable classrooms. And I think that it just sounds to me like, people want to hear what you're really thinking, as somebody said, out of the box, to really try to address the needs of their children and their families, not just looking at the renovating the school for the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I'm not sure if you were at a previous meeting we held where we had the park and planning staff came, because we are trying to be responsive. We heard a lot of folks asking if we could do a land swap with the adjacent park that's behind the school. And for various reasons, that was not going to be a viable solution, but it was something we did look at.
Hi. We are sitting on the same campus as a library that was scheduled to be open in April 2024. And can you go back to the previous slide? My understanding is that this is a 2-year project and that the schedule calls for my kid to be bused 45 minutes to arrive for school to start at 9:45. This means that in each direction, they'll be in rush hour traffic. I'll be in rush hour traffic every day for 2 or based on the project near us, because things do crop up. It's a similar site. 3 years. I don't think this is a realistic plan. And my question for the time being is, what is the basis of the 9:45 start? Because that guarantees rush hour for all of us every single day.
So that's a great question. And I asked the same thing of transportation. Could it be any different? But because the same buses serve the high schools on their bell schedule, then serve the middle schools, and then serve 2 tiers of elementary schools, that was not something that was currently something that they could consider. But again, between now and the time that the school is ready for construction, the situation could change. There could be different bus availability, just that the operations piece could change. There could be an opportunity to shift that, but we also want to be cognizant of children's general schedules and afternoon and evening activities. So making a dramatic shift away from other elementary school schedules isn't really desirable either, because we did float potential other schedule options just to see if there was going to be anything that works. I don't think that there is at this point.
Julie, can I just pause for a second? So certainly transportation was the main theme of tonight. We do have a bunch of slides on the options. We will certainly post the slides regardless if we get through all of them. Can I just do, since we are at 7:50 already and want to be mindful if there's anyone in the room that did want to actually have us walk through the options in person, as I know we could keep going on the transportation comments. Again, we'll post them whether we get through the other options, but if folks want to stay more on the transportation, we are happy to do that, or we're happy to move through the slides for people to see options. Just don't want to leave anyone out who maybe has missed the options before.
Show of hands, anyone want to see the presentation of the options for the building?
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, I think I'm next. So I had a CIP related question and then a relocatable classroom comment. Having a little pod of relocatables is tough because they don't have bathrooms. And so if you had a pod of relocatable classrooms separate from a building that children could easily access, especially children who might have mobility issues, that's going to be a problem. I'm going to put porta potties out there next to the relocatables. I think everybody would lose their minds. And I know that MCEA would lose their minds if teachers were expected to use porta potties. They're also very hard to secure. And when there are tornado and bad weather drills, kids have to come inside from those portables and line up along the hallways in the actual brick structure that's closest because that's the safest place to be. So I have more things I could say about relocatables, but I'll hold my fire on that. So I had a CIP related question. So I was looking at Cold Spring and Damascus and Twinbrook and Whetstone, and I was seeing that it looks like on the forms, it looks like a lot more money has been spent so far with those projects. Cold Spring, it looks, and I could be reading it wrong, so please correct me if I am wrong. Looks like they've spent over 28,000, Damascus over 28,000, Twinbrook 25,000, Whetstone 28,000, but Piney Branch only 2,000. So I was wondering what that does to Piney Branch as far as being in the line for next up for construction. And then also with CIP, I was wondering if the emergency work at Westland Middle School that had to be done recently with the tree fall and the dangerous mold situation at New Hampshire Estates, could that foreseeably impact the where we are in line?
So the dollar amount.
So I'm not sure where the dollar amount figures that you got were from, but what I can say is that all of the feasibility studies, we have our architects and their engineering consultants. We're currently paying them similar fees, but we have not allocated dollars towards design and construction for any of the schools at this point. So those would be maybe placeholder dollars. There's no order right now. All of those schools are, including Piney Branch, under currently equal consideration. We'll check into that. Sure. And then with regard to the emergency spending, there are different pots of money in the CIP that don't compete with each other per se. So emergencies, there's contingency available to deal with those. And the New Hampshire Estates is primarily an HVAC project. There's different HVAC funding than major capital projects. So that would not delay, per se, the need for MCPS to continue renovating schools.
Ellen Savian, my kid is in college, but I've sat through many MCPS meetings, created committees, and so forth. So I have a couple comments to make. I'm here for the pool. I'd like the pool to stay. It's a community treasure for so many reasons. Secondly, one thing the parents should look at when they're thinking about options is a lot of times MCPS will create a spread of a school, meaning one level, because they don't want to spend the money for a single layer to be able to house additional weight of another layer, another floor, and another floor. So when you look at the options, when you get to that, make sure they're spending the money so it can grow based on the community and have, because that's what happened in the school up at Tacoma Middle School. They said, no, we can't go up because the one level was only built to house one level to a code. So look at the codes, okay? I'm just FYI. And lastly, I am amazed that MCPS still is coming to these meetings without statistical data on what success looks like. When you rolled out the Chrome notebooks, it was like a deer in the headlight. We asked, what does success look like? Better reading scores, better math scores. What does that look like? And we got a deer and just exactly what this was. It's going to be great. It's going to be shiny. It's going to be awesome. You should be surveying kids after they go through this process, the community, the school, come back with that data. You should be seeing how much of a deviation you were on your prediction versus actual numbers. Where is your data? That's what I say to the parents. They had none for us when they rolled out the Chrome notebooks, and reading scores and math scores have not gone up. What is the success rate of the kids after they go through a process like this? What does it mean for them to that next level? So I just urge the parents here to have a voice.
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. I have a more boring question. So I just had a question about the CIP process and like the overall timeline. So say in the fall, like we do have like good advocacy and then like we make our voices heard at these meetings and like the testimony. And like, so then somehow we open up the possibility of an alternate site for the school or alternate site for the holding school location. Will those processes then like open up like new studies or things that will like basically take more time that like we won't be able to be part of like the 2027 to budget? Like, will we get delayed because of that?
So I think what you're asking, and I apologize if I'm not understanding and answering this the right way, but once you get into the CIP, the next step, not sure when it would be happening, is going through design, and which is another opportunity to basically start from the preferred option from this study and further develop it and refine it.
Right, but we start looking at like alternate sites, alternate holding sites.
Oh, okay.
Like, will that like? It seems like a whole extra process.
It
Like,
could,
beyond the feasibility study, it'd be.
could alter the schedule. Can't really say definitively, but likely would. It also would likely require additional funding. So that would just be something that has to be considered along with the funds for the project itself, additional funds and potentially additional time, doing a site selection process or another exploration of alternates.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? Are you talking about the holding center location, or is that what you're talking about as an alternative location?
Both. Like people have been talking about both, like alternate sites for the actual new school and
Okay.
also for the holding school in the meantime.
Okay.
I want to understand better your comments earlier about the CIP and advocacy and the holistic approach. Because you mentioned that there are a lot of different buildings that are under consideration for their status, either needing renewal or renovation or replacement. The way I interpreted that was that, like, for example, we should know to look at the list of potential schools in need of renovation and perhaps be considering the fact that there are 4, 5, 6 schools in line in the Down County region, all of which will need a holding school over the next decade, and that therefore a case could be made that a new place should be identified somewhere a lot closer to this area that will be needed not just for our school, but for the other schools that are in line. Is that what you're alluding to?
Yes.
And is that what it looks like? I mean, you're much more familiar than we are with the holistic picture. Maybe you could guide us a little about what schools are on that list. And I mean, we might benefit from a little of your background there. And perhaps also you mentioned, one of you, I can't recall which, mentioned that there are school buildings that there are buildings that are already owned by MCPS that may or may not be in use as school buildings now, but that might actually be candidates for this. We're not interested in wasting money that could be spent on schools, but if we have lots of money being spent on school buses and diesel fuel, I'd rather spend them on making our kids' lives better. So if you can,
It's a great question.
That would be helpful.
The CIP documents can be a beast to get through. I would encourage you to look at Appendix I. That is where you will find a list of board-owned, typically former operating schools that have been vacant for a long time. Some of those might have a short-term tenant in them, and others are, quite frankly, just vacant. And then there's also county owned. Most of those have long-term leases in them. I think so. The most immediate ones we are interested in always take into consideration as we go through the CIP planning are the board owned. That's usually where we start. And I can't remember unless Julie, you can remember off the top of your head. In the document, there is also always a table that talks about the current active holding centers that we truly have used in the last couple of years, like Fairland, like Grosvenor Center. Radnor is another one that we use on a regular basis. There's about 5 or 6 of those. But to several of your point, there is a lot of other Board of Education owned property throughout this county, some not in great shape, and certainly need a big investment in order to get those to be made. But that is something we want to take into consideration.
Oh, hi. Thank you. My concern also was like with the bus rides, like I know it was brought up about the seatbelts, but I would feel like I'd need a guarantee that there were seatbelts if they were going every day, both ways on the highway for 2 years. And also just not the time loss that the kids wouldn't be active taking the bus there and back, but also just I think at a previous meeting they said that there wasn't a guarantee that there would be like a bus monitor. And I just think with behavior with 3rd to 5th graders and also phones, some kids have phones and just this unregulated kind of time. And then also like bathroom, like if the kids need to go to the bathroom and are on the road for 45 minutes and the bus isn't going to pull over or something, like what's the plan for something like that with 3rd grader with the, so there are a lot of busing, just like the bus ride concerns that I have that I'm wondering how other schools have dealt with that. And I talked to another teacher at a different school that is in Silver Spring, and I think the kids are at a holding school and it's a much shorter distance, but he said there have been a lot more behavior problems with the bus. So I'm just wondering how that would be handled and regulated.
We'll take that back to our team.
I'm a parent of kids that have gone to Piney Branch as well as they're currently at Sims, and am familiar with the CIP process to some degree, but I still have questions like others do. In that at Sims currently, there is something that is in the pipeline, it's being done, and renovations are happening. But regardless of where you are in this process, there will be opportunities for it to be delayed. And what the problem right now at Sims and other down county sites that are being renovated and improved is that there's been cost overruns. And so what has happened is that they have tabled the completion of that work. So the science labs at Sims are not being done. The linkages to learning rooms are not being completed because they do not have the resources to do that. So regardless of where you're in the SIP process, it does seem that there will be opportunities for delays. There will be opportunities for cost overruns. And then what we need to be mindful about is, are we maximizing the learning environment for our children? Because, I mean, it's really unfortunate that, things like science labs are being tabled. But is that true for this that we're talking about? I mean, because we're talking about it as if we get it on the list and then we're golden, it'll just sort of slide, but that's not really what happens. It's sort of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes 3 steps back.
Thank you for raising that. One difference between this project and that project was that addition project did not have a traditional feasibility study. It made it more difficult to cost estimate, and there were unforeseen conditions and complications as a result. By doing a feasibility study here, we are getting a much better sense of the true cost of the project with its different iterations, anywhere from the renewal cost to options 1 through 4 with and without pool costs. So I believe that this project is less likely to have that fallacy. I can't say that it would never happen and never get delayed, and we can't predict things like that, but I would say we have a much stronger sense of staying on budget because we are doing a feasibility study.
Another parent here, just want to echo what several other parents have said, that, you know, engaging in the process in a community meeting, as one is expected to do in a community meeting, does not imply that I don't believe the school should be renovated. So I definitely agree the school should be renovated. Just also want to make sure that all options have been explored on behalf of my two kids that'll be affected. When in the CIP process would be the appropriate time to ask about, I know that in DC, sometimes they get around this challenge with rapid summer modernization, and there's issues with that. It's not like totally foolproof, but really accelerated summer renovations to help mitigate the impact of needing to relocate students. And when would be the appropriate time to look at plans on a different timescale than 2 years?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Julie's smiling because I came from DC, so they actually don't do it that way. It was called a phase 1 program. It was done about a decade ago, to be honest. The full modernizations can typically be done, just like Julie was saying, 18 months to 2 years, but often we just say 2 years because moving a school mid-year is less than ideal. So it gives the contractor some flexibility. It's better to move. I have done mid-years with a school because traditionally, yeah, you can probably do it in the 18 months of construction, but it's not great to move it. It's better to start all the students at the beginning of the year and do it for the full 2 years. DC does similar to what Montgomery County does, where they'll do like more systemic. So you might do a window replacement, a roof replacement, and maybe some flooring, but not a holistic, complete renovation of a project anymore. It's not feasible.
Well, I know that
to do
we looked at 4 options, not all of which were a total gut, right?
The first option really is that, a complete renovation, which would not be feasible to do in a summer.
Yes, hi. One more question, just following up on the gentleman with the Iron Man shirt. You know, in terms of, will this trigger more studies? Will this trigger a delay? Would that then result in us losing our round of a chance for a reno, which, echoing her, we all are in support of? That is why our fear is, you came here with this, so there's not going to be a choice for an alternatives, or with the good councilwoman saying there's chances for leasing. You're going to come in and you're going to say, this is the choice. We are going to lose out on everything. If we don't get this now, we have to lock it down. Sessions coming up. Is that something that will not happen? And if it's not, in the July 23rd meeting, will you come present alternatives to us or to the council and present those alternatives? And Councilwoman, are there alternatives within Tacoma Park that you, and I think Mayor, that you guys would be willing to work with us on? Or is there a list that you guys could present at council at some point? You got Adventist, you got the school off by Spring Park, which I don't think is county owned or city owned, but I mean, there are choices within a reasonable area that parents would probably be okay with. But I mean, I think we just need, this has been going on since April. I've been at almost every meeting and the same thing has been issued. I don't want to get to a point where this gentleman said, all these talks of alternatives will push all this to a point where you guys just have to make a decision and send it to the superintendent, and then it gets board approval, and boom, we're stuck with Grosvenor, and we had no say, and our voices didn't really matter. So at the July 23rd meeting, will you guys have options for us? Or if not, then when? Because at some point, we're just tired of this.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no. We cannot present other options at this time beyond Grosvenor because that is one of the existing holding centers that is available. You have not missed your opportunity. I want to be clear with that. We cannot get ahead of our superintendent and our Board of Education reviewing other sites and locations, again, holistically across the county, thinking of our holding centers. That'll be part of that plan in October, at which time you will still have the opportunity to provide feedback. But we cannot present those options
So in October,
July.
we will have a chance.
Correct.
When will you guys have a chance to show us the alternatives you've come up with?
It'll all be presented publicly to everyone at the same time in October. And
Now-
again, it'll impact multiple schools in the
Understood.
county thinking holistically about the
between
holding.
now and October, when you guys present a superintendent publicly, could we have a convening with interested parents and maybe a local elected in terms of helping you guys find other alternatives? So when October comes around and you present publicly, we're not all caught off surprise saying, oh, well, you know what? It's just Grosvenor, guys. Because I've been on both sides of this. I've been in your position plenty of times. I know how these things work. I'm sure all these other parents here. So that is, would you guys be willing to meet with a small group of parents who have been pushing this so that we have, you can go through the cluster program, Blair cluster. They're farther away from this situation. We're here, and so are the 50 plus members, and so are the 200 plus parents that signed on to a letter that you guys have that we're awaiting a response to. And I'm the response to that. So we are happy to plan accordingly. We can meet monthly. We can meet, however you want. But we're tired of our voices not being heard. And clearly, I understand you're doing this and this, but there has to be, you guys have to be able to present other things. I mean, your hands aren't that tied.
Do you want to, before I respond?
Yeah.
Like you want to comment?
Hello, everyone. Mayor Talisha Searcy. Thank you all so much for coming out. So I do just want to give folks a little bit of background in terms of alternative sites that were reviewed by MCPS a few years ago. This is the second round in which the community was engaged with MCPS regarding Piney Branch Elementary and the renovations. So Washington Advances was looked at. There was a number of other sites within the city that were looked at, and for one reason or another were deemed not sufficient for at the time it was the relocation of the school. One of the things that I do, I'm very transparent. I'm not going to tell you that we can do something that we just simply is not going to be feasible in terms of timeline or feasible in terms of money. The properties that may be vacant in the city are privately owned, which would require someone to purchase property or work out agreements regarding properties. And because of the process that was undertaken by MCPS to review those parcels for the purpose of trying to see whether or not the school could use those locations, in many instances, they were not deemed for safety reasons or other reasons to have a lot of challenges in terms of being alternative sites for the school. So the end result would be a lot of money that would need to be invested in a lot of construction work that would need to happen in order to get those alternative sites up to the appropriate MCPS standards in order to even have them be a holding school. So there was a lot of work that was done a couple of years ago under my predecessor, Kate Stewart, who went around and we had MCPS actually look at different locations within the city. It's not to say that something couldn't change, but I want to just be 100% transparent with folks that at this stage to review other parcels would require land acquisition. In many cases, some of these properties are worse than Piney Branch, so it would require a substantial investment in the properties themselves. So I just want to make sure that that piece is clear. So again, I don't know what additional parcels that MCPS may have. That may be an alternative, but I can speak on behalf of the city parcels that they would require at least 2, maybe more years of work in order to make them a viable alternative site.
Hold on, sir, just to, can we get a commitment to you guys to holding regular meetings with interested parents to make sure we are part of this decision process? I don't think you answered that. Can you get to us to that? Can you promise that you'll have parents be part of this decision process, and we can meet regularly, whether it's with you, Robbie, if you want to join, you're more than welcome, you know, because it seems like our voices have not been heard. And it seems, you know, Mayor, thank you so much for your comments. One of the things that Laura Stewart brought up was maybe there should be a holding school. Maybe that investment, going to the mayor's point, should occur. And is that something you guys have? Because there seems to not be a holding school within, you know, at least a 10-mile radius. Is that something you guys have considered, or you can't say at this point?
Other holding centers?
Within this part.
I mean, yes, again, across the county, it is something we don't feel we have enough of to keep up with the construction that we would like to see happening in the county based on the needs of the school. So, but again, we want to be strategic about what we're going to invest in so that it's not just one school would utilize it, but it would make sense for a number of schools to go there. That's really the strategy. We are always happy to meet with people. This is part of our engagement and community process. So yes, with the caveat of we cannot commit in any of those meetings to this will be your holding center. It is part. That's what I just want to, I don't want to overpromise that.
It's important that as you gear up to October, and apologize to those online, we're not caught off guard that a decision's made and we are stuck to several people's points here. You know, as a feedback loop to the community and PTAs and incoming area schools and aftercare coordinators, we're all bought in on we want the school to change.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, October is a recommendation, and you have a few weeks before the Board of Education will take action. And so there is an opportunity, if it's specific testimony to the holding center that is presented, or the scenario. Usually it could be testimony to the timeline or not inclusion of a project at all that was expected to be included. But just to be completely clear on process, a bunch of other communities are in the same situation. It's kind of a wait and see while the superintendent is figuring things out and collecting data. So while we can meet, I just don't think that there is going to be new information that we can share between now and October.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Wallace. My children went to school here. We're all parents. We all have fears and hopes for our children. What I hear here tonight is fears of the parents, that security fears of the children being on the bus, fears for them affecting their education, their grades, etc. But they also have hopes. And I think you all also have hopes, this is Tacoma Park after all, of fine leadership things happening with your kids, that they may become Supreme Court justices and replace some others. And also mayors and city councilmen and astronauts and presidents, whatever. I know Tacoma Park has high hopes for our children. All of those people in all of those occupations have been in the past, including our mayor and Jessica Lamon, patrols, okay, in the past. Patrols are needed on the buses to go to help with the security, I think. And I've talked about it with the vice principal as well. You have patrols at the school now, but they don't go on the buses. It's an opportunity for the kids to learn leadership and responsibility skills. Okay, you can make a funny face like that, but yes. Okay. Okay. The older kids in the school have that opportunity. They are already patrols. They can, I have already seen, that's what I love about Tacoma Park. But anyway, what they have already, I have already seen. I live across the street from the Tacoma Park Elementary School. The buses that go there already drive down the street a little too fast. They go over the speed bumps a little too fast. I've seen little tiny kids standing at the windows, jumping up and down, and bumping up and down when they go too fast. Right now, first is attention on, are the school buses being properly, are they safe on the buses now? Period. If you've got that baseline, then you can build on that and see how other students can help other students be safe in the buses. My daughter was a little older. She was in middle school. She was bused to Westland, and she looked forward to the busing because she could sit, she could think, she could do her homework, she could spend time with friends, etc. Everybody's shaking their heads. You could have an open mind. Have an open mind. Look at the silver lining of anything, because if you keep hitting your head against the wall, all we're going to get is animosity. Look for solutions. How can things be safe? How can things be good for your kids? And ask the kids what they would do to spend those 45 minutes. They are resilient. They can come up with their own solutions. But you have, what you're expressing now is a lot of your own fears. And these kids, I'm sure, are resilient and can handle this.
I can't wait to pick up my kid at 7 o'clock at night. This will be awesome. Sorry for the inconvenience.
You'll be after him.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
What's that?
Yes, she's spoken twice. Oh, okay.
Like medical school, I did it, so you have to do it too. Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's find something better.
Okay. I had actually previously looked at the appendix that you mentioned that lists the other MCPS and Montgomery County owned places. And there's 2 sites on there that I guess were recently elementary schools and are now not, and are just listed as TBD and are a lot closer than Grosvenor. I know literally nothing about them besides their names. Could you talk a little bit about Rollingwood Center and former Parkside Elementary School and what separates a holding school from a recently vacated elementary school that is listed as TBD on this sheet?
I would say anything that's not on the current holding center, like a Fairland, is in pretty rough condition and will require, while it's board owned and we could use it, will require significant investment. So that's probably the nuance, like the very specific difference. Not off the table, and we need to be strategic about the investment and where we put our money. And it might make sense in certain strategic locations across the county to do that. But which ones and where is all part of things we are considering.
And so Rollingwood, at least according to Google, was still in use just a few years ago, right? And just in those few years, MCPS let it go to the weeds? Why?
It was leased to a private school. We are evaluating its condition.
So I had a question about note-taking for tonight, as well as the previous meetings. I would love to see the minutes of these meetings get posted in other languages, the languages that a lot of the families who attend Piney Branch speak, and those would be Amharic, Spanish, and French. So that would be wonderful if we could get that done. I've noticed that some of the other projects that are on the same list with Piney Branch do have minutes posted. They don't have them posted translated, but we can be the first. We can do that. So I know that with some languages it's more expensive to get the translation than in others, but if we could push for that, because there are a lot of people who have kids at Piney Branch who aren't being represented by the folks who've been able to come out for one reason or another. And then I was just going to piggyback one thing that the mayor said about these other sites within the city. For example, the John Nevins Andrews School. It could also open up a can of worms if MCPS takes over that school and decides to make it a holding school. you're going to have a whole nother layer of fun dealing with the residents who are close to that school, who are now going to have school buses rolling in and out up and down the roads. And full disclosure, I don't live anywhere near it, but I'm just thinking ahead because Tacoma Park loves to debate stuff. That's what we do.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your time. And I appreciated your discussion of how a new holding school would really have to show benefit to a sizable portion of this county to make enough sense for our decision leaders to put it in the CIP and to spend the resources on it. Can you speak a little bit to what a site has to do for those of us who are interested in a closer site to keep 600 kids accounted for at all moments of the day, to provide them with the services that they need, be it meals, be it spaces? You know, what does a site actually look like so that we advocate for something that is realistic for MCPS to operate?
Okay, so if I'm understanding your question in a very broad sense, you would like me to briefly describe the building and site amenities required to house a school. So,
Yeah, with the idea that it helps us understand what is not a realistic option because it just simply is not operatable as a school that can keep 600 kids safe, and what are options that in theory could be a viable holding school, whether there is one nearby or not.
all right, so I'm not going to dive too deep in the weeds here, but the building component with the classrooms and required core spaces, at least one multi-purpose room for students to eat lunch, and a larger space that could be used for a media center in addition to classrooms, support rooms, health room, main office, those functions. The school also needs to provide opportunities for outdoor space, playgrounds and fields, basketball courts, staff parking. Pedestrian access is very much desirable, and opportunities for buses, and ideally separation of cars and buses, and pedestrians and bikers. So a lot has to do with site amenities, and I think that was one of the challenges with some of the other sites, was the ability to get students and staff to those sites, onto those sites safely. Because it's one thing to fit out a building, but it's another to have the proper site amenities. Everything would need to be fully ADA compliant. So there's a lot of issues potentially when renovating old buildings that, hazmat abatement, all sorts of things could come up when you're looking at an older facility to renovate.
Thank you for patiently answering all of these questions. And I was online for the first hour, but my kids were yelling, so I apologize if this was already asked. But I'm curious if you could tell us why it didn't happen the last time, because I do have a lot of friends in town who are worried that we are making so much noise that we're going to not get a new school this time again. And I think, I share all the concerns of all the parents here. And I also am now concerned about sending my kids to Piney Branch in its existing state based on what I've learned. So I'm curious if you could tell us, at what point is it going to be like, Tacoma Park is too difficult and we're not dealing with them, versus like, no, we're still going to get you a school and we're committed to helping find this path.
So for clarification, when you said last time, were you referring to the site selection or the building addition project?
I think that, the site selection piece, because my understanding, I don't really know, but my understanding was that we did go through this whole process once before, and then I don't know why we didn't get a school.
The 2017.
Yeah, the 2017 one, but I don't know what happened.
Okay, so
I can take that one. So it originally was going to be an addition. And so parents were convening to talk about that. And then quite frankly, a very similar conversation started to come up, which was, hey, are there other locations in the city that would be better for the school, right? Maybe we could have more space, we could have more green space. And so we went through this whole process of reviewing with MCPS, with members of the Board of Ed, to look at different sites within the city. And then we said, okay, well, we also have the minor master plan, which is this big zoning amendment. We said, okay, well, let's see how that shakes out to see whether or not zoning changes as a result of the minor master plan. And MCPS may say, oh, with this new zoning, we may expect for a massive increase in the number of students. So again, maybe we would need a bigger school with more space. But that didn't manifest either. So we looked at a bunch of sites throughout the city that ultimately, for one reason or another, didn't meet MCPS requirements. We went through the minor master plan amendment to look at the zoning along Maple Avenue, which also included Piney Branch. That was also something that was discussed as part of that to see whether or not any development activities might warrant estimation in terms of an increase in the number of students that would attend the school that might, for one reason or another, open up some opportunities for a alternative site because this site is so small. That didn't manifest. So now here we are. And I made a little bit of a stink during one of the CIP meetings about actually getting this feasibility study started, because in the CIP, it basically said, hey, we're waiting on the minor master plan amendment to be done to determine whether or not we're going to move forward with this site. I said, well, it's done, and you guys, nothing has changed. So that is kind of in a Cliff's Notes overview of how we went from 2017 to today, and we are just now in the thick of the feasibility study.
So it's not that Tacoma Park was just so difficult to work with that we didn't get a school. Okay.
Not at all. It really was a number of parents realizing that the space is really tight, and that ideally people want more space for their kids to play, and instead of just doing this addition, was it an opportunity to do something bigger? And we turned over every rock. County Council President Stewart did as much as she could to try to get folks to the table to talk about private property in the city that could potentially be an alternative site for the school. It just didn't work out.
That's reassuring. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Amy Westlick. I'm a city council member and a parent of a rising first grader. And as much as feasible, I'm talking from the parent perspective right now, as well as a kid that I would bet is on the 20-minute ride right now to Piney Branch, because we live at the very eastern end of the city. First, I wanted to say thank you so much. I'm sure this is a challenging meeting, so thank you for hosting it. Thank you for everyone who's participating. And second, I really want us to get an improved Piney Branch. And I want to make sure that that is the top thing that we're saying and keeping as the priority. And then as a pragmatist, I want to say that if we cannot find some other alternative, I would really prefer us looking into Fairland over Grosvenor. If we have to use a holding school. I do not love the idea of going on the Beltway. And it is a bit against traffic. I know this because my wife does that drive every day to and from work to Columbia. There's traffic. I'm not saying there aren't those times, but it is against the traffic. So if it had seemed for transportation, you all, that they were very similar, I would ask to go back and look again at Fairland, because I think that Fairland has some benefits over Grosvenor if our only option is a holding center. Thanks.
I appreciate that, Julie, and I actually talked about that today. So this was definitely the preferred location from department, but I absolutely hear you because they're very similar.
Hi, so one question, has there been any consideration of pairing with Prince George's County schools? We're right artificially on a border. I mean, if a holding school should be in this area, another county that's also on the edge could benefit from it. You know, just thinking outside the box, is there any option of not just penalizing down county for being towards the artificial border of a political entity? I know that can also be complicated. My question is, I'm still getting more and more confused about the appropriate timeline for parental engagement on the holding center. It's sounding like this meeting was just tacked onto a series. You were mostly talking about the feasibility, and I know that's very important to a lot of people in the room. I've heard people say, oh, you wouldn't want to have to go to Silver Spring to go to a swimming pool, so we need to have a swimming pool here. But it sounds like this is too early because October is when the proposal will be, but then there will be a proposal and it's too late to start a new study about possible holding centers. So when are parents supposed to have our input and how? That is still confusing to me.
It is not too late in my mind in October. That is when you'll see the recommendation from the superintendent and you can absolutely weigh in during the public process. And that's, I mean, Julie chime in, but it's not too late at that point.
I think this is maybe a follow-up question for that. So when the recommendation comes in October, are we going to see the schools that are on the list of the capital improvement plan and all of the then holding schools that they will go to? So is it a bit like musical chairs? Like if we get assigned Grosvenor and some other school gets assigned Fairland, like we're having to kind of fight the other parent community for the destination, recognizing the environment of scarcity about the holding schools you discussed. Like there's not going to be like a buffer list of empty holding schools that we can just swap in. Like that's a pretty significant swap.
That's correct. Hopefully nobody is fighting anyone for different holding centers, but hopefully what that does is explain the logic of who is decided to go where, right? And the rationale. You'll see who we are proposing to have that full renovation modernization, which helps then also inform who is going to what holding center and the logic as we try to keep everyone in the county in mind. So hopefully when you see those two together, it helps justifies and explain the rationale and in determining the location.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up. Is the idea of using portables in addition to a holding facility pretty standard throughout the county? So that would also apply.
I would say most of them have additional. Yeah, we try to put the majority of the students in the building to the best of our ability, but almost all of them, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, almost all of them have portables to support capacity.
Okay, so that's kind of the status quo.
Yep.
So something I would recommend keeping in mind then when we're talking about, oh, it's too expensive to redo these other schools and other locations, if that is the status quo, and granted it may not be ideal, if it's cheaper and faster to fix a closer area that we're gonna have to use portables in anyway, maybe that's also worth considering in this grand scheme of thing. And I say that to the parent side and you guys as well.
Is it my turn? Thanks. To follow up on the mayor's comment about sort of the timeline, the other thing that I think was really important back then is that the county wide was doing a boundary study, and there was actually a lot of discussion and data that came out of that. I mean, I believe WXY was the consultant group that did that, because the data is really very rich and is still, I think, very relevant for our discussions now. But my question for you is that, I mean, that was 2019, 2020, so it's been a while, and we had the pandemic come along, and, you know, that's influenced how we think about learning environments. But is there going to be any attempt to sort of update that data? Because you were talking about a holistic approach, and that was certainly a holistic approach, and it was helpful for those that were at the granular level to understand how they fit together, but it also allowed us to understand the holistic view that you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
There is a current boundary study at the middle school and high school level.
But that was elementary, middle school, and high school. It was
correct. Great. So with the timeline that we are on with that study, we wouldn't be introducing any elementary schools. Once that study concludes, there's a potential for elementary school studies. But usually that is when there is an overcapacity school and an adjacent school that has capacity. So I don't think that is necessarily going to be the case in this area, but it's always something that we look at when we go through a CIP.
Can you hear? Okay. My name is Wayne Sherwood, and I live on Grand Avenue, just a couple of houses up the street. And I did come to a lot of meetings when the earlier process went through discussing the school. And 2017, can it really be 8 years ago? I guess it can. And there were parents that came out regularly to these meetings, and they had these very lovely conversations. Week after week, month after month, and I came to a lot of them myself, and people thought they were being heard. And then the consultants came at the last session when they presented their results, what they were going to present to the school board. And a man got up and he went through a presentation, and it was that they were going to build the new school up on the field. That was their recommendation. And in order to do that, they would have to have the school buses come down Grant Avenue. But it wasn't wide enough, and the turning radius wasn't great enough at the bottom of the street. So they were going to have to take the sidewalk out all along Grant Avenue, which had just recently been rebuilt as a accessible grade sidewalk, and they were going to have to expand the turnaround at the bottom of the street, and they were going to have to regrade the access road up to the soccer field and to build a new school in there. And they might have to take out a couple of houses there too to give them enough room. And I remember it. I was next to the last person. I had my hand up at the end, and I just spoke. I said, this is a total betrayal of everything that people have been discussing with you throughout this whole process, and now you come up with that. And then after that, it just kind of disappeared, and I didn't know what happened to it after that. So I just say, I agree very much with the people that are saying, if you can find some way to continue to meet with people from the community over the next couple of months before October, it would give people a much better feeling that they're being listened to, rather than just wait till October and you'll find out what we come up with then. Thank you.
I just want to be mindful of time. It is 8:45. I'm sure some people need to get home. So we'll take 2 more questions to end this evening.
Yes, thank you again. Just so we're all playing from the same playbook. So July 23rd is the next engagement with the city of Tacoma. Between July 23rd and October X date, whatever, you will be evaluating all the sites. It seems like you're already, you were talking about potentially Fairland too for our area. So you're already discussing these things. Will you be, and going back to my original point, will you be, and maybe I'll follow up with you separately about potentially setting up some alternative meetings, but even more forums like this. But then October comes, you present to the superintendent. How long at that point, to this lady's point, will we have to present in front of council, or not council, the Board of Education, on our views as parents again, because we're doing it here, and I'd be interested in seeing how these minutes are inputted into that as history. Is it a month? Is it a week?
It's usually 6 weeks. We can follow up. I believe the dates have already been set, and I'm sorry that I don't have them off the top of my head.
If they're publicly available,
usually
we can look them up.
4 opportunities between that. I thought either like October 13th, 14th, that the superintendent makes his recommendation to the Board of Education, and then the Board of Education has to make their submission to County Council early December.
Okay, and then so between July 23rd and October, are you allowed to give us updates on what alternatives you are looking at? What other holding school? Is this a shroud of secrecy situation that only the superintendent at the end?
It's really this part is really the internal process, and the public process is from that October and through.
Well, the public
December.
process started April, and so I hope
For the feasibility study.
correct.
No other feasibility study, to be clear, has been discussing holding center. It is just
Yeah, I know, this
focused
is-
on the feasibility.
this
study
meeting
for
was
that
was
site.
scheduled because of parents advocacy.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to make sure that we're still included.
Mhm.
You don't have to tell us, closed door sessions, et cetera, et cetera. I get that, but that our input is still being considered. That's a gap, July to October.
Yeah,
That's
you're
quarter.
absolutely welcome to continue as you guys think about it. I mean, again, board-owned sites and county-owned sites, to the mayor's point of looking at other private property, our typical go-to are the board-owned sites first, and then county-owned sites secondly.
And then will you be looking to another gentleman's point, I forget who it was, about what the cost estimate of busing, 2.5, 3 years of busing versus using that as an investment to rehab certain sites too. The alternatives to that to make a more permanent solution for down county schools.
We do a little, I would say the more cost analysis we're doing is the investment to open or
Okay.
consider an alternative holding school. And in terms of how many years can we use that?
Gotcha. Thank
It's also two different budgets, operating versus capital. Yeah. So one final question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate. We started this meeting at about 7:10. It's now 8:45. The amount of time that we've spent in this meeting, where I can see that there are people that are restless, and I know we have elected officials in the room, is what we're asking our third graders to spend every day, every school day. This is the amount of time we are asking our children to spend in public transportation. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out. We appreciate your time this evening.